This is the bandsaw, a deceptively dangerous machine. When used incorrectly, it will chew you up and spit you out. However, with the proper safety procedures, you can enjoy the use of the bandsaw for many woodworking applications. The bandsaw gets its name from the narrow band of steel that the blade consists of. The blade is welded at one point on the bandsaw to create a weak area. Because of that weak area, it may break. So you do not want to stand to the side of the bandsaw. There's a chance that if the blade would break, it could come out of the bandsaw, out the side of the bandsaw, and strike you. The best place to stand when using the bandsaw is in front of the cutting edge, due to the weak point in the blade, which may break, but doesn't often happen. The bandsaw can be used for a variety of applications. But the first thing you must do is set the upper blade guide to about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch above the material that's being cut. Also check to make sure that the bandsaw is hooked up to the dust collector. Secure all loose items to stay away from moving parts. We can do rip cuts, cross cuts, and curve cuts on the bandsaw. Here I am demonstrating a rip cut. What I am doing is I am cutting with the grain of the wood. Now the disadvantage of the bandsaw is that you have to do freehand cutting. Normally there's not a guide on it like there is on the miter box saw or the table saw. The bandsaw rotates at a much slower revolution. Because of that, our safety margin is 2 inches. It's a little bit safer than our circular saws like the table saw and the miter box saw. This is a completed rip cut, one that's been done with the grain of the wood. We can also do cross cuts. That's going against the grain of the wood. Again, we must observe our 2-inch margin of safety when creating a cut. It's important when cutting to make sure that your hands are not in the path of the blade. There's our cross cut. One of the advantages of the bandsaw is it will do curved cuts. I've marked out a curve on this piece of stock, and the first thing that I must do when creating this curve cut is make a series of relief cuts. Relief cuts are short little cuts that will break away when I make my actual curve cut. This prevents the blade from binding and breaking. It also keeps the blade from getting dull as well. If you bind up the blade on a sharp curve cut without creating relief cuts, you can dull the blade. There's my series of relief cuts. Short cuts made before I actually cut my curve. Now what those should do is they should break away as I cut my curve on the bandsaw. Let's see how this looks. I'm going to shut off the machine because I have scraps that I need to remove, but there's my curve cut. That's a cut that we cannot do on the miter box saw or on the table saw. So we're going to primarily use the bandsaw for creating curve cuts. Now I'm waiting for the blade to come to a complete stop before I remove my scrap material. It's important to get your scraps out of the way or they could get caught in the blade guides. Find the trash and dispose of them properly. Another example that I'm going to perform is backing out of a long cut. Let's say you're going to create a long notch like I'm doing on this piece of stock. When we go to make a long cut that we're not going to pass all the way through on, we're going to want to shut off the machine before we back out of that long cut. So as I near the end of the cut, being careful to maintain my 2-inch margin of safety, I'm going to turn the machine off and wait for the blade to completely stop. Now the blade has a lot of inertia and it takes a while for it to coast down. But it's important that you wait for it to stop because the blade guides do not support the blade when you go to remove the material. Now I'm going to turn the saw back on and finish this long notch on the bandsaw. Now we've completed that cut. Again, never back out of a long cut while the saw is running. Once we have finished using the saw, it's important to clean up our work area. Clear the table and make sure that your scraps are in the trash. Also, make sure that the saw comes to a complete stop before you start cleaning around it. Even though the machine is off, as long as the blade is moving, it can still injure you. This is the bandsaw, stationary equipment useful for cutting sharp curves.